Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I'm here with the one and only Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kawale Kid. Hello, Shaka. How are you?
How are you, Paul?
I'm great, and yourself?
Hugely terrific, you bet.
A warm welcome to you all. Our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka. And today we are going to be talking about some really interesting developments on the continent. So bring those questions. Shaka will be taking your questions in a moment. But now let's start in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Once again, this new kid on the block, Abiy Ahmed, has done it. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the borders are open between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Your take, Shaka.
Not only are they open, but in terms of transport by road, it is now activated. And of course, you know that we already have flights between Addis Ababa and Asmara. A lot of very interesting developments. You're looking at a gentleman, to be very honest with you, who could genuinely be referred to as a new breed of African leaders. This is a man, to be very honest with you, if I had a vote, I would recommend him for the next Nobel Peace Prize.
Interesting. You talked about a new kid or a new breed of African leaders. We've had that term before when President Clinton and his former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, made a reference to, not very far from there, they made reference to Isaias Afwerki, Meles Zenawi, Yoweri Museveni, Paul Kagame. We've seen different results come out of those new kids on the block who are referred to then as the new breed of African leaders.
You're right, Paul, but I can only remind you of the saying that the greatest friend of the truth is time itself. The greatest enemy is ignorance and all prejudice, while her constant companion is humility. You're looking at Abiy Ahmed. Abiy Ahmed has established facts which have, in fact, triggered the sense that you can actually see those facts working. You know, a lot of dictators talk about statistics, especially when they reflect some of the things they claim or allege to have accomplished, and yet those facts do not have legs, do not walk. Those facts do not reflect in the people's stomachs, in the people's neighborhoods. In this particular case, I submit, even though I never went to law school, I submit that you're looking at facts right here. They are actually walking, they have legs.
Shaka, what is so different from the other leaders? How come no other leader has done what this guy has done in a very short time? When you think about it, Abiy Ahmed has not been in power for a very long time. It's not even been a year. But in the few months he's been at the helm of that great country, he's done some incredible things. So what makes him really stand out?
It is very true. First of all, let's face it, he is very symbolic of the changing demographics. The changing demographics in tandem with social media. This guy is very exposed. He's very experienced. He is a soldier. He is a scholar in the sense that he actually does have several degrees to his credit to boot. He is a guy that, in fact, headed the intelligence unit in Ethiopia, so he knows how the systems work. Above and beyond, we are looking at an individual who pretty much is exuding his character, integrity, and who believes and is committed to accountability. It is not that he is the first person, frankly, to be a leader who has been able to do those wonderful things on the African continent. There are other examples which preceded him. Unfortunately, they are far back in our memories. I keep going back to March 6, 1957, in the Ghanaian capital of Accra. At that time, the country was called the Gold Coast because it had plenty of gold for the colonizers and all that kind of stuff. The man called the Osagefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the kid from Nkroful, he actually said, he had the audacity to say that today the independence of Ghana would be meaningless unless it was linked with the total liberation of Africa. And he did not simply talk the talk, Paul. He walked that talk so that Africa could actually walk the walk by providing the necessary tools to the extent that a lot of people, a lot of countries eventually liberated themselves from colonialism. When he was overthrown in 1966 by a Western engineered coup by a man called Major Akwasi Afrifa and his colleagues. A man called Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere basically received the baton in Dar es Salaam and did his thing. That man is responsible for the liberation, for the most part really, of Southern Africa. Specifically, I'm talking about what used to be Rhodesia. You're talking about present-day Zimbabwe, talking about Zambia, and Malawi really was part of, you know, that neighborhood. Yeah. And then you're talking about Namibia. And you're talking about the end of apartheid. And in 1994, you have the Madiba becoming the first African president of South Africa. This was because of a man called Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, and of course, his Southern African brother. Don't forget, Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda. So there have been these people, my friend, who did not have boundaries or borders in their minds. They were not, you know, a Muganda. They were not Igbo. They were not this. They did not look at life in that context. They looked at the African personality. And so I think in a way, when you look at Abiy Ahmed, he receives the baton from those great independence founding leaders.
Earlier you talked about maybe if you had the powers in you to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize, but other people would say that perhaps maybe you should add Isaias Afwerki on the list because it takes two to tango. And when you think about it, during apartheid era, Nelson Mandela had to share the Nobel Peace Prize with one of his tormentors,
F.W. de Klerk.
So wouldn't it be fair to nominate both of them?
I think that I would reluctantly agree with you. When you think about what, of course, Isaias Afwerki has done, frankly, since the early 90s. I mean, let's face it, Eritrea, as we talk, happens probably to be the only country that has the distinction on the African continent which does not have, or at least pretend to have, a constitution. He is the constitution in effect. So I think...
I wonder what other countries that claim to have constitutions, when they look at Eritrea, what do they think?
In fact, you could probably say that Isaias Afwerki is a man that you can judge not simply by the cover of the book or by, you know, what you would call data, but that in fact this is a man who, if he wants something, that's what he is going to do.
He's very pragmatic.
Precisely, very pragmatic, rather than these others who pretend to have constitutions and spend time mutilating those documents to the extent that one could actually be tempted to say that they now use what you would call personal manifestos.
Shaka, what's at stake here? You have two countries that have been at loggerheads for a very long time. For the first time in nearly 20 years, they're opening those borders. They have, most recently, they have had their diplomatic relations. Everything seems to be looking very, very good as we speak. But what's at stake for ordinary people? What does this mean?
Well, I think, first of all, ordinary people, you know, it began, in fact, with the flights, the Ethiopian Airlines Airways from Addis Ababa to Asmara, some families, in fact, were rejoined. People are very happy to interact as they used to do many, many years ago. Man, let's face it, when you go back historically, we pretty much really look at Eritrea and Ethiopia sincerely as a family. And that's what it should be. So I think that what is happening in that region is hugely, hugely terrific.
Let's, before we leave that region, as we speak, the South Sudan signed another peace agreement in the Ethiopian capital as of yesterday. Symbolically, it looks great.
Have they signed the agreement yet, or are they in fact signing tomorrow?
Yeah, they're about to. They're in the process of doing that. As we speak, IGAD members are there, and they're trying to negotiate some of the components of the peace deal.
You should also add, by the way, that they are in fact celebrating the Ethiopian New Year.
Yeah. Remarkable stuff. So what does this mean for the people of South Sudan? They have been waiting for a very long time for this peace really to come into place. Is it going to finally happen, or it's one of those peace agreements that we've seen over the years?
Well, first of all, I have to be honest with you, I am not a prophet. So I really don't know what is likely or going to happen. All I can say is that let's hope that once again, whatever those types of signatures do not prove one human genius, a doctor or a professor, Albert Einstein, when he once said, if you continue doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, you are looking at insanity. Because let's face it, this is not the first time, nor the second time or third or whatever, that these individuals have actually put their signature on some of these important documents, which turn out, frankly, not somehow to bring about the badly needed peace and stability in the Republic of South Sudan. But again, you have Abiy Ahmed, and this is probably part of the reason, in fact, we are seeing this type of thing happening. Let's hope that these other leaders sincerely can take a leaf from Abiy Ahmed to say that if it is possible, for example, for Addis Ababa and Asmara sincerely to sit down and share the familiar njara, you know, their national food really, and look at each other and relate with each other as something
and taken so long. Why have the South Sudanese armed movements not been effective and maybe changing the status quo over there?
I think what is needed really in South Sudan is a sort of paradigm shift in terms of the minds, in terms of the attitudes of some of these, key leaders, sincerely, and also the leaders in the region, because sometimes some of these things happen because there is an enormous or tremendous influence from without. But I think, frankly, anybody, any good or well-meaning human being, frankly, would reach the conclusion that what, in fact, the people of South Sudan need is peace. Because let's face it, first of all, it is a very huge country. Mind you, it is much larger than Uganda and Kenya combined, even more for that matter. One of the most incredibly fertile real estate. This is a country which could actually become the breadbasket of the region and the Middle East, not to mention oil, gold to boot. And what do they do? What don't they have? In fact, they don't have people. They should be in the business of importing human beings, just like a country like Qatar, for example, whose capital is Doha. It has very few people. In fact, when you go to Qatar, the majority is made up of foreigners. I am even told that an African country called Gabon, you're talking about the same thing, or Equatorial Guinea for that matter. So it's not about resources. It's not a shortage of resources. No. It's a question of bad management. You just need to manage. And frankly, you also need to feel and think that you hold each other's backs.
A quick apology to our viewers. I'm seeing a lot of comments on social media saying that they're getting a bad signal. I think that's something technical to be sorted out, so we apologize for that. But in the meantime, you are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you live every Tuesday here at the Voice of America studios in Washington. Back to you, Shaka. Let's go to another comment. Let's go to Lukanga Kapisha from Zambia. Is China recolonizing Africa? Europeans came offering salt and gunpowder, and now China comes bringing economic aid. Maybe I should add that as we speak, China is trying to negotiate with the Zambian government to see how they can take over some of the investments that they put out there, and the government has failed to repay those debts. How do we tackle this issue of borrowing money from China and at the same time trying to figure out how China can help us develop our economies?
I think that the first part of the Zambian brother's question is correct, because there are a lot of people, in fact, who are saying that China is probably recolonizing Africa, obviously because of the stadiums they have built all over the continent, the roads, the highways, and the railways, and all that kind of stuff. But let's face it, when you think about it, what about Africa? Where is Africa? And in fact, for the first time probably in a long time, I agree with some of the views of Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni when he says, it is in fact, when you talk about aid, it is Africa in fact providing aid to Europeans, to North America, and in this particular case, to China. Because how did China, or how has China become the kind of super economic power that it has become? On the back of African copper, cobalt, oil, and you name it. So where are these Africans really? Or where is the African leadership when we need it? Africa is not poor. On the contrary, Africa is one of the wealthiest continent on this planet Earth. So what is it lacking? It is lacking management skills. It is lacking visionary leadership. It is lacking the modern skill sets in order to harness its God-given wealth resources, both natural and human, so that it can actually take off. So it is Africa. It is you guys, especially your demographics. This is the challenge to your generation, Paul Ndiho. You guys need to step up to the plate so that you can do better than our generation. You need to step on our backs so that you can see a little bit further, and if you cannot see our backs, just push us aside.
But Shaka, maybe let me push back on that. How can we step up to the plate when you guys, who are our fathers, who are our elders, don't want to give way? You are looking at dictators in Africa, they want to stay put. They don't want to give room for these young people to come up. How do we fight you guys and at the same time do what we are supposed to do?
You have a point. But you know, I agree with the saying that all of life is action, reaction, and passion. And to ignore the action, the reaction, and passion of your time or generation is to risk having not really lived at all. You are not telling me that your generation is going to occupy space simply because we have actually become a sort of socio-economic roadblock. You have to figure out a way how to put us aside. Because if that were the situation, then we wouldn't be reading history. We wouldn't be looking at some of these great individuals who have been able to make huge differences in society. I think you can do it. All you have to do is believe in yourself. As for me, Shaka Sali, my shoulders are here. You can feel very free to climb on Shaka Sali's shoulders, and you can be guaranteed that you will see a little bit further than Shaka.
Let's go to another comment. Let's go to Emma Morris. Has the situation in Uganda affected other dictatorships in Africa?
Well, first of all, let's face it. You talked a bit earlier how the Ugandan president used to be one of these individuals that the Clinton administration identified as a new breed of African leaders. And you know why? Because whenever they interacted, the Clintons would discover that they read about the same things. They read the same books. They read Hadley Chase. They read Chaucer. They read Bernard Shaw. They read Shakespeare. They read a lot of similar things. And therefore, they looked at them and said, you know what? These guys are legitimately our colleagues. And therefore, these are a new breed of African leaders, because mistakenly they thought that the leaders before this generation had probably not read the same books, while in fact, a guy like, again, Kwame Nkrumah had a PhD, an earned PhD, a legitimate PhD, not, by the way, like the earned PhD of a former Zimbabwean First Lady, Dr. Grace Mugabe, who had the record time of earning a PhD in 2 months. Mine took 6 years at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Yeah. I may be stupid, but I'm not dumb.
Shaka, tomorrow you're talking to another remarkable young guy called Bobby Wine on Straight Talk Africa. And we have a lot of people in Uganda who are interested in the Bobby Wine factor. But maybe let me tie that to a comment from Abdurrashid Kaban. Would sanctions be effective in removing President Museveni from political office in Uganda, or it has to be an organic thing that is originated from Uganda and owned by Ugandans?
I think it has to be both. It has to be something, frankly, that Ugandan embrace, especially because the Ugandan ruler actually says he changed the constitution back in 2005 because he succumbed to the pressure of the Ugandan people. The question is, who are specifically those people that he's talking about? So if the Ugandans that are listening to me or watching me are part of those people, maybe it is high time they change their mind, especially if they think it is necessary to change their mind, because the man they supported probably is not delivering goods. Because people talk about Lee Kuan Yew having been the Prime Minister of Singapore for 31 years. But they forget that Lee Kuan Yew not only was here Prime Minister for that long, but the man was delivering. The man transformed hawkers, Paul, into multimillionaires. What about that? You did not have to worry about the quality of education in Singapore. You could go to any university from any school in Singapore. If you were sick, you had first-class treatment. You did not have problems trying to go overseas to look for or to get medical checkup, just like the Ugandan elite do. And if they do, what about the nearly 39 plus million people who can't go anywhere? So let's face it, it's about quality, not quantity of time.
Let's go to another comment here. It says that while President Yoweri Museveni was making an address to the nation over the weekend, he made reference to how young unemployed people in Uganda are not, they should blame their parents who never planned for it. He said, for example, he has planned for his daughters. When they graduate from schools, they don't have to look for jobs. So other parents should follow suit and plan for their children to have a better future. How would you respond to that statement?
Unfortunately, I did not read that speech. So frankly, let me hope that he was misquoted. Because if he was not misquoted, then Mr. President, it is time to step aside, because obviously you are abdicating your responsibility as the president of Uganda. The reason you are the head of your government is because, first and foremost, you have to deliver. He has to deliver. He has to provide the security, first of all, for all Ugandans. He also has to create an environment, or an enabling environment, that turns out with some jobs for these young people. It is the responsibility of the government, because if the government cannot produce jobs, the government cannot provide security. And I'm not just talking about security in terms of having a police officer, a military officer, a paratrooper, and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about food security. I'm talking about people living in an environment where they can dream, have dreams, and in fact, at the end of the day, can realize their dreams. Because otherwise, you can't justify why you are head of a government that is in charge of the country for the last 32 years. You can't do that. But you know what? There have also been some other quotations attributed to President Museveni. I don't know whether they were accurate or not, but they suggested, for example, that at one time he said he was not a servant of the people, but rather was in fact working for his children and his grandchildren. I mean, this is not a man at one time, frankly, who said that he as an individual and his family were actually sacrificing so that they can develop Uganda. Those are contradictions.
Are you suggesting that he's oblivious? He doesn't know what's happening in the country?
I don't know. I just told you, some of the things that have been attributed to him. If you listen to me very carefully, frankly, you can connect the dots.
Well, on that note, Shaka, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you over. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, see you next week. Until then, so long from Washington.
Thank you very much. The kid from Busoga College Mawili. Where is this big belt that I used to love?
Growing organisation.